All right, everybody. So in this video, we are going to discuss everything about tipping, specifically as it relates to, my experience as a casino streamer. So how much you're expected to tip, how much I actually tip, and the differences in tipping culture between different areas, cities, countries, etc. So as a casino streamer, I have played in a lot of different casinos and ate and drank in a lot of restaurants and bars in Las Vegas. And I will say that from my experience, Las Vegas has the most expensive tipping culture that I've encountered, but quite possibly New York or LA would be on a par with Las Vegas. So based on my experience with the restaurants in Las Vegas, I would say that 20% is pretty much expected. 20% plus. I typically tip somewhere between 20 and 25%, depending on the quality of the service. I would definitely consider myself to be a pretty generous tipper. In spite of the comments I see on my video saying how I don't tip, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In Las Vegas, I would say around the 20% mark. Now, when it comes to gambling at table games as well as slot machines, I have my own system for tipping, and this is, of course, personal, and I'm not going to tell anybody else how they should tip, how they should spend their money. But I tend to go with tipping $20 per thousand on a hand pay. So a hand pay is a minimum $1,200. So if I got like a hand pay that was exactly $1,200 on the nose, I think $20 is a reasonable amount to tip. Sometimes I'll tip a little bit more than 20 per thousand. So a lot of how much I tip depends on the context. So one example would be like, let's say I buy into the table for $3,000, I'm down to the felt, and then I come all the way back and I end up having like a $10,000 win, so I have $13,000 in front of me. In that case, I might tip $500, even though that's significantly more than $20 per thousand. But sometimes I'll just be in a generous mood because I could have very easily had $13,000 less than what's sitting in front of me at the end of the stream. So I'll tip a few $100, maybe even 500, depending on the context. Usually on a table session, win or lose, I'm tipping about $50 if I've been there for a significant amount of time. Now that said, of course, a lot of people respond to that, will disagree with how much I'm tipping and be like, well, do they tip me when I lose thousands of dollars, which is most of the time that I gamble? Do they tip me? And the answer is, of course not. That's not how it works. It only goes one way. That said, though, as a streamer, I do receive super chats and paid memberships, things like that, which can be considered tips. So it does give me the ability to tip a little bit more generously than a typical player. And again, how much you tip is really up to you, and I'm not going to preach or suggest minimum tipping amounts. So that pretty much covers Vegas. 20%-ish in bars and restaurants, 20 per thousand on hand pays, and then a little bit more on table games. Now, how does Vegas compare with other cities? Well, the only real context that I have is Canadian tipping culture, because that's where I'm from, and I have done a lot of gambling and dining out in Toronto and in Canada, and I would say that the tipping expectations are significantly lower in Canada. You could probably get away with tipping between 10 and 15% at most restaurants. I do notice that when I tip more than 15%, like 20%, which I do tip 20% quite often, the service is decent. I do notice that I get a lot of gratitude from the wait staff in Canada, whereas in Vegas it's more of an expectation to get 20%. Now that said, I mean, what I've heard is that In some cultures, like in Japan or a lot of places in Asia, China included, tipping is not part of the culture. In fact, in many situations, if you tip, it's considered to be rude because you're implying that the ownership of the restaurant is not paying their staff adequately. So that's interesting. Wouldn't that be nice if that was the case in the U.S. and Canada? But it's not. So that pretty much sums it up. That covers my views and experience on tipping. If you have your own opinions on how much you should tip or tipping in general, I would really appreciate if you leave your thoughts in the comments. And as always, please like and subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.